Hello everybody, and welcome to this video on the Azure Pro Services Web DataLink extension. This project was created in response to a customer that needed to be able to access parts of ERP data that aren't directly exposed in the AP integration. Typically, this is done by professional services by creating a SQL data link and going ahead and querying for the data that they need. In this particular case, that was not possible due to the hosted nature of both ERP and DocStar. So this web data link interface, once dropped in place in the DocStar server, which we'll show a little bit later, what it does is it allows you to specify declaratively what kind of web API calls you want to make. And I have a call definition help file, which I'll go ahead and post on the Yammer conversation, but we'll go through these line by line just to kind of get an understanding of what each one means. For starters, you have the name. The name must match the data link name inside of DocStar. It's how it does the lookup. It's how this application in here does the lookup to find out which of the call definitions you want to execute. So once I go ahead and create a data link, I'll call it ERP logon, and because it matches this name, it'll actually execute this definition here when it's invoked. The next piece is the URL to invoke. This is pretty obvious. It's just a URL it's going to be invoking. This piece does support, and you'll see that there's areas inside the documentation that say it does support direct parameter replacement. So if you have a parameter, it'll actually directly replace that value. It doesn't encode or anything like that. It just does a direct replacement of the value. The next one is the method. This is also a direct replace capability piece. The method is what type of HTTP verb will be used during the process of invoking this data link. The authentication scheme and the authentication parameter, both these are optional. They provide authentication to the server that you're invoking to. In this case, since we're actually talking to the ERP server, the way that one works is you provide basic authentication with your credentials. In this case, the credentials are a base 64 encoded value that is the username colon the password. The way that I would go ahead and get this is I would go to base64encode.org. I would type in the value that I want encoded. In this case, it's manager colon manager, the default value for ERP, hit encode. And there is my base64 encoded value, which notice that actually matches my auth parameter here. Next is whether or not you want to allow invalid SSL. If you don't have a real SSL cert in place, you're going to want to turn that on. Otherwise, you probably should always leave it to false. Generally, you don't want to, if there's something wrong with the SSL communication, you don't want to allow that thing to go through, especially if you're providing any kind of data that might be sensitive. Log path, this is a fully qualified path to a log file. This is great for diagnostics. Any call made to this particular call will be logged into that path. That includes what's being passed into the call and what's coming back from the call. Also, a great way to test this is by using the client service, running it in diagnostic mode. So you basically have a command prompt open, and just using Fiddler to go ahead and see what the calls look like going back and forth. That's actually how I diagnosed a lot of these ones as I was implementing them. Once I got past the first one, I really didn't need it anymore though. The log path was good enough. WS headers are any headers you want to add to the call. It's just a key value pair. These don't actually be needed here. That's optional. You don't have to provide any. Columns is the columns that you want to have returned. The name is actually the name, that the column name itself, and the path is how you want to access it inside of the JSON object. So in this case, once we get this back, it comes back with a very basic JSON object. It's just a curly brace and then access token, and then a token type expires and then refresh token, and then it closes curly brace. It's very simplistic, so I don't need to do anything special here to be able to access these properties. I'm going down until something that's a little bit more involved. Well, actually, I'll talk about one more piece here. Get sales order header. This one has an example of replacement parameters in the query string. This happens to be get call. The authentication string token type and access token actually ends up mapping back to here. And in workflow, what you would do is you would actually execute this ERP login, read these values out into a parameter, and then for all these subsequent calls, actually provide the token type and the access token from that call into these ones. In this case, I am providing a header that has the call settings that sets the company and the plant. If you don't provide a plant, that's actually optional. You can just leave it blank and it'll be fine. And once again, in this case, it was very simplistic. This call returns a single sales order and everything's at the root level, so I can just simply access the properties very easily as seen here. In this case, I'm actually accessing a user-defined field, which is one of the things that the AP integration currently lacks. This one can actually access that user-defined field and read it back. Search GL accounts is one of the first ones in here that actually returns multiple values, so it's a little bit different. Once again, a lot of this stuff looks the same, but one additional property this one has is a collection path. This actually tells us how do you access the array of values that I want to have returned. When you execute this code, you'll see that it comes back with a collection path of value. The value it's a JSON array. As a JSON object, it has a value object inside of that is an array, and that array contains a bunch of objects that represent GL codes. Inside that array, each object is easy to access once again. It's just a simple path. The name of the path happened to be the same each time here, and we can just simply access those properties from there. The last example we have that ships with this particular project is an example of a create. This happens to be a create vendor. Most of the functions are the same here, with the exception of this one has a body. This is a post call to this endpoint, and inside of the body, I specify a minimum number of parameters I need to be able to go ahead and create a vendor. You can specify as many or as little as you like. In this case, I just specify the minimum, which is the vendor ID and the name, and then row mod of A that tells the system that I need to add. That's a rule inside of ERP, not inside of our system. And then when I get it back, I'm just reading the Cicero ID back, just to make sure I have a valid vendor. I'll go into something a little bit more here. Anywhere where we read from the JSON, such as the collection path or the path in the columns, we do support very complex read operations via the Newton Soft library. If I were to go ahead and look at this URL that's in this link, once it loads, okay, well, apparently it's not going to load here, but you can go to this link here and it tells you how to do a very complex query, if needed, to pull out the data that you need. If it's not as simple as it's an object with a property, maybe it's multiple layers deep, maybe you need to have some sort of search functionality across that JSON. All that's possible with query JSON select token capabilities. And all you have to do is take that dynamic URL that you're going to be using and put it into this path here, and it will use that to populate that column. Okay, great. To kind of show it in use a little bit, any custom data link ends up in program data. under Eclipse inside of a directory called DataLink executables. In this case, I just have my ProService Web Data Link in here, along with all my call definitions, which is the file that we were just looking at. If I switch to DocStar, and I go to the DataLink page, here I have a connector called Real Web Services. That is a web service type data link that's going to invoke my Azure ProService Web Data Link DLL. No additional arguments or prefixes are required, and I currently have implemented 2 data links. You notice that the name matches the name that is in the definition file, and I can test this one, and sure enough, it comes back with an access token and a bearer, and now I have information that I can use in subsequent calls to be able to make API calls. The other one here I have documented is this get sales order update. This one had a few parameters in it that are replaced. This test live will not work because I need a valid token. I could copy it from the ERP login, and actually let's just see if that works. Let me copy the access token out and go down here and go to my test value, and I'll paste that there, and I believe this was a capital B. And let's see if that test live works now. No. Okay. That's all right. It will work in the workflow. So let me go ahead and go to show you what the workflow looks like. In the workflow designer, I have a very simple example of using this ad hoc web service. If I go into the action, you'll see the first thing I do is an ERP login. And I actually take the access token, write that into parameter, and the token type and write that into a parameter. In the get sales order header, I just have hard-coded company ID and order ID. Obviously, those can come from anywhere. And then I'm passing in the token type and the Z-access token. And I'm passing in the values are coming back, the open order to the title and the ship via to a code. If I go ahead and run that, again, it's one of these guys. Let's say we do this one. Let's do workflow, assign workflow. Right now the title is Troy and there's no keywords. If I do ad hoc web service, assign, it just went ahead and I believe it was the shipping method, which is best, that went into here, and whether or not it was completed went into the title. So there you have it. I just did an ad hoc RESTful service call to ERP and filled in data into DocStar. And that is all declarative. You can go ahead and make define any set that you want. A really helpful page to go to is the API help page. And that is the server URL / whatever the site name is for ERP, then /API/help. Typically you're prompted for the password, but I've been here before, so I wasn't prompted. You can go ahead and find the service that you wanted to work with. For example, let's take a quick look at sales order. I can go into this service and see the methods that I want to be able to invoke. For example, if I want to go ahead and delete a sales order, I can see here that in order to delete a sales order, I need to provide a company ID and an order number, and I can go ahead and try it out. And I actually don't want to do that one off the top of my head. I want to try something else, like maybe a get sales order by order num. So in this case, it's Epicor 6. Do I have an order num save? I think 5005 is a valid one. I'll go ahead and try it out. And you can see that this is what I get back. And this is what I was talking before about a simple return. It's just an object and a bunch of properties underneath it. And that's the easiest one to work with. You can just say, I know, if I want to read back the column open order, the path to this one is open order. And you can call its name whatever you want it to be. Here's the request URL and what it needs to look like. Obviously, the Epicor 6 and the 5005 is something you would want to make dynamic, so I would make those parameters. But this kind of gives you an idea of how you would go about figuring out how to define your fields or how to define your definition. And this is exactly how I define mine. This isn't exclusive to ERP. This is a generic implementation, so you could actually work with anything that has a RESTful interface or any kind of web interface. You just need to be able to define it in this definition file, and you can go ahead and invoke it. All right, guys. If you have any questions, let me know. Thanks.